I want to draw your attention to both the characters in our story. And it seems to me that both of them had nowhere else to turn. So they turned to Jesus. And so this got me thinking about, when do I turn to Jesus? When do I most turn to Jesus? So I go with the existential questions. I go with the big questions that my brain's not big enough to figure out the answer. I go when I need to make an important decision because I don't want to be reactive. I go when I'm confused and when I'm confronted with chaos and crisis. I go in gratitude. I go when I'm concerned, when I'm frightened, when I'm discouraged. I go when I'm undisciplined. I turn to Jesus when I need to find stillness and inspiration. I go with the needs of others. I go to listen. And so that's how I answered the question. So what about you? When do you turn to Jesus? And what is obvious is that whenever I turn to Christ, it's always an intentional choice. And it's interesting because I realize that I don't turn to Jesus unless there's a reason. And whether that reason is desperation or simply remembering that Christ is present, it always takes a choice to turn. So I pause to remember that Christ is present, to ask, to listen, to receive. I lift up my eyes and I breathe. And there's nothing magical about turning toward Jesus. You don't have a secret handshake or no strange word. There's no spiritual power or there's no super knowledge. It's just simply an act of turning toward. He turned toward one who promises to be present. And you go there. Just like this story of Jairus and the ill woman. They point themselves toward Jesus. So now this got me thinking further, and I ask the question, what prevents me or limits me from turning toward Jesus? And I started thinking about the last couple of sermons, and it seems to me that fear and worry are two limiting factors. And if you think about it, think about all the times fear and worry is referred to in the Scripture. I think they get in the way of us being faithful, of us turning toward Jesus, of us living the more excellent way. And remember what worry does? It diminishes confidence, chips away at trust. The Greek word for worry is a combination of two words, merizo, to divide, and nous, mind. So worry actually is a divided mind. Worry always gives you something to do, but nothing is ever solved. And so I want to suggest that worry eliminates the need for others because it turns you inward. It does not turn you outward. Worry gets in the way of turning to Jesus. So does fear, and we know that fear is a good thing on certain levels. It puts us in a survival mode. But what does it do when you're trying to build up trust? So, fear, however expressed, limits our ability to turn toward Christ-likeness because it's hard to listen when you don't trust, right? When you don't trust, you don't listen. Fear also leads toward a lesser opportunity to be obedient. It challenges our practices and our development of the faithfulness, those core traits of living like compassion and honesty, patience and thankfulness, joyfulness. Fear makes it hard to decipher direction. Because if you're in that flight and fight mode, you cannot use the full capacities of what God has given you. Fear makes you respond only to the partial. You just can't see what's out there when you're afraid. So how can I worry less, decrease my fear, and trust God more? Turn to God more. And so if I first remember, and I'll invite you to keep it close to your heart this day, is that where you point yourself is where you will go. And if you point yourself toward living in the presence of Christ, you will go there. If you point yourself toward being more dependent on Christ, you will live more dependent on Him. So let me suggest a few things before I close that will be helpful in assisting you toward turning toward Christ. So let me suggest that you simply become more mindful of the present, of the now, of today, that you cultivate contentment in your life wherever you are, that you choose to be grateful and generous, that you take responsibility rather than be careless. Point yourself toward what matters, and you will live a life that matters. And when we live pointed toward the presence of Christ in our lives, guess who shows up? So the invitation is simple. Remember to turn toward the presence of the living Christ. Remember to turn yourself toward the presence of Christ.